Hey everybody, Jack Stan Johnny here, and it's been a long time, but I just started working on my SV650 again. So in the last video, I'm trying to remember, but basically I had almost finished rebuilding the bike. I found structural damage to the frame. The lower shock mount was broken on the frame, so I had to tear it all apart. And a good friend of mine gave me a titled frame and a new swing arm because mine was also damaged. And I was gonna have a friend of mine paint that frame and swing arm, but unfortunately he had to close the doors in his paint and auto body shop. The frame had been sitting around there for a while, and I couldn't be bothered to go out there to start doing the prep and paint it myself and everything. And then I just decided recently I'm just going to keep it silver so I can save a bunch of time and money and just start putting this thing back together and try and get it running and rideable. So that's where we're at right now. So on to the new frame. So what I have here is a K6 GSXR 600 front end, and on a first gen curvy SV650, there's a couple things you got to do to make this work. I can't remember what all of them are, but one of them is the top bearing here in the head tube, which is, I believe, called a boss, has to be replaced. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been many years since I needed to research this. Can't remember which one you need exactly, but this is the factory one out of the SV frame, and it won't work for two reasons. One, the needle bearings, the conical needle bearing for the front end is too tall, and it sticks out of the head tube. The second reason is the angle. The angle of the bearing itself doesn't match up here. I don't believe it does. So I'd already made a video on how to remove that, but I just checked it out, and I was listening to some Public Enemy, like you do, and it was way too loud, and the video kind of sucked, so I'm just going to do the Cliff's Notes here. So to remove it, let's get up here. To remove that top boss, you need a long chisel or flathead screwdriver, and you need to enter in through the bottom side of the head tube. And hopefully, yeah, you can kind of see over here. Sorry, there's a weird angle for me. Here and here, are these grooves, and they're the only access point for you to get in from underneath with a chisel or a screwdriver, and then take like a rubber mallet, dead blow hammer, whatever, and pound on the screwdriver, a little on each side, over here, then over here, and it'll slowly work its way out. You'll see a gap, the gap will get bigger, and then before you know it, you take one good whack and the whole thing flies out and hits the floor. It's a very satisfying ding that it makes. So, to install, see, I had to swap the bearing that was in there over to my new frame. So to install it, it'll be obvious. It'll only be able to, I mean, it could go in either way, but you'll be able to tell which way it needs to go in. You'll kind of set it on the top of the frame there, inside the head tube. You could probably freeze it and maybe have some success shrinking the bearing. I didn't do that. This was just an impulse thing, and so there wasn't any forethought put into it. What I did is I set it in there and gave it taps, light taps with my mallet, just enough so it would set in there on its own. Made sure that it was even, like evenly tapped in place, and then I took a 2x4, set it over top of it, and then hit the 2x4 with the mallet to evenly distribute the weight of and the impact of the hammer. Next, the front ends can be slid onto the frame. Before I go any further, I should probably note that this is probably not the best way of doing it when rebuilding the bike. And what I'll probably end up doing, and I might just start from right here, I'm not that far along, is it's better to build the bike around the engine. But, yeah, it's probably not going to happen in its current state. I'm going to need some finagling and stuff. It's a little tricky to get around with my old robot leg. So doing this solo is a little bit sketchy. So it might be better for me to build the bike up a little bit and get it off the ground and then mess with the engine from there with the lift. But I digress. Back to the head tube. It might get confusing if you don't catalog and take pictures of how everything goes in sequence. So for anybody watching this that might need to know, the order that this goes in is, as I said earlier, that conical needle bearing goes in first into the head tube, or around the around the main shaft of the triple tree, right? Then this dust cover goes on right on top of it. It seals the bearing from foreign debris and whatnot. Then you've got a lower section of threading and a top section of threading. On the lower section of threading, there are these two castle nuts. Castle nut goes on, tightened, torque to spec. Then there's a washer with a little key in it, like a little tooth on the inside of the washer. That'll slide onto a keyway on the lower portion of the threading. Then the top castle nut, which basically makes it like a jam nut, is tightened down on top of those. From there, this thick washer here and this nut here are what you use when you get to the top triple tree, which is not currently installed. And that's pretty much it. I'm probably have some of this stuff redundantly covered in another couple sections of video that I may or may not use. I'll have to review it and see. But that's it for right now. The next step is to take all the good bits off of that frame. The chain, which is like brand new, and the Vortex rear sets, and the motor mounts there. Transfer everything over to the new frame. Let me see if I can show off a little bit of the other stuff that I got done here. So one of the other little side projects for the build is getting all the bracketry and stuff welded onto this subframe. This subframe was custom built. I designed it and did so under the counsel of the welder that welded it up for me. I'm using my old Ducati Monster seat. It's a little worse for the wear, but that's okay. So is the bike and so am I. Let's just take that off carefully. So it is it's super lightweight. I probably mentioned it in the previous video, but it weighs maybe a pound. It's definitely strong enough to hold me. I'm not going to be doing any two-up riding. And I couldn't blame somebody for not wanting to go on a motorcycle ride with a dude with one leg. It doesn't bode well, their confidence in me. So, yeah, I have to get the brackets and stuff made up for that. Luckily, my next-door neighbor is a welder. And apparently he is a good welder. He does like nuclear welding for the shipyard and welds like coolant pipes and stuff for nuclear reactors. So he should be able to weld on some brackets for my brake light and such. Oh yeah, there's one last thing. So I think I came up with a new name for this build, and I think I'm going to call it Theseus, because the story of Theseus has to do with a paradox, with if you were to take an old ship and over many, many years, slowly replace parts on it, one part at a time, after a certain point, once you've replaced every part on it, is it still the same ship? And that's kind of a little bit of a crisis that I ran into with this build. And again, I may have mentioned this in my previous video, but that's the original frame right there. And that was when it was a completely stock bike. So when the bike was totally stock, I rebuilt it. I put on a different rear wheel off a GSXR, a front end off a GSXR, the seat off of a Ducati Monster. And then, I wrecked the bike and damaged the engine. So I got a replacement engine. And I damaged the gas tank, so I got a replacement gas tank off the same bike. And I moved further on with the build and then realized that the frame was toast. So I had to replace the frame. Everything on the original bike has been replaced. So it's not really the same bike anymore, is it? Like, to me it kind of is. Kinda. But that was what was really sad. The original bike that I had is going to be totally gone. And I really don't know how I feel about that. So I felt like the name Theseus was very fitting. So, for now, everyone, I think that's about it. Not very eventful, but it's what's going on right now with the bike. So, thank you for watching, and I tell you to stay tuned, but don't hold your breath. It might be a little while before I do another one of these. But until next time, bye.